Might still be weeks away, but the Brooklyn Nets continue to remain at the center of all trade rumors, of all NBA rumors in general when you talk about potential deals involving their veteran pieces and questions about the team's front office and how they will build around their young core. Brooklyn continues to remain one of the league's most fascinating teams. Hello, everybody. Welcome in to another edition of the Brooklyn Boys Show. I am your host, Connor Long, coming to you guys live right here on this Thursday evening, October 16th, 2025. Thank you all for joining us. Be sure to drop down below, smash that like button, hit subscribe. That is the free way to help us grow right here on the channel. Today, we are joined by a very special guest, the People's Insider, baby. You all know him from Bleacher Report. You know him from the Stein Line, the great Jake Fischer, baby, gracing us with his presence right here on the program. Jake, it is great to be with you, my friend. Thank you for sparing the time.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for the kind introduction. Let's jump into all things Brooklyn Nets, my home borough
Yep.
team. I'll be going over there definitely next Friday for the opener against the Cleveland Cavaliers. I'm sure he'll be there too.
Absolutely. And look, this team, like I mentioned there in the open, is so intriguing just because when you look at the overall roster construction, the first team in NBA history to utilize all five of their first round picks. And they're in a rather intriguing spot because they have veteran pieces like Michael Porter Jr., like Terrence Mann, like Haywood Highsmith, who they just acquired. And they also are still trying to establish that young core, and they made it clear that they think they have their head coach of the future in Jordi Fernandez. They still feel confident in their general manager, except, with the exception, obviously, of pressure from the fan base and in Sean Marks. But where I want to start is a player who us net fans talked about tirelessly all offseason long, a kind of free agency interesting situation that you covered all offseason long, that being, of course, with Cam Thomas. And I think if you told any Nets fan at the beginning of the offseason that he would come back on a qualifying offer, they would have looked at you like you were crazy. But ultimately, that's what happens. He signs the 1 year, $6 million qualifying offer, leaving a lot of Nets fans disappointed, and I think rightfully so. What does the future look like, Jake, for Cam Thomas? Because obviously he can waive that no trade clause and the Nets can try to trade CT ahead of the deadline. I think the most likely route, just from the outside looking in, is he plays on the Brooklyn Nets this year and gets a bag next offseason if he's able to stay healthy and continue to average, 20, 25 points per game at a high level. The biggest knock against him is all he can really do is score, score, and score. And that's valuable to NBA contenders on a contending team, but where does it scale on the pay range? That's been one of the biggest questions. But the overall question here, what does the future look like for CT? Can he get traded this season?
I haven't thought about him as someone who would get traded this year because when you talk to front office executives, there isn't a lot of value in Cam Thomas for what he does. I think while he is a great scorer, the shot selection and how he does it and the flow of an overall team offense is not something that really is so commodified right now in today's NBA. Today's NBA values pace, space, ball movement, creating 2-on-1 situations on weak sides of the floor when the ball swings around a half court possession. And Cam Thomas doesn't really do that. Cam Thomas takes quite a few dribbles when he's operating, right? And I don't think there's really a ton of interest in that at this point in time. I think for him to find a trade scenario, he probably would want to get traded only to a team that provides one of two things, that puts him in a situation to compete in a playoff type setting, to showcase himself in a way that's really how you get paid in this league. It's by showing that your skill set contributes to winning, particularly winning games in the postseason. So that type of audition for the league would be beneficial to him. Or he'd probably want to get traded to a spot that already has indicated they'd be looking to pay him a certain type of number that he'd be willing to take beyond this year. So I think you're going to really need to have a super efficient shooting, scoring season in order for that to happen. Maybe along the way, with an injury or two to certain scenarios, there could be a team that says, you know what, we really need bench scoring to uplift our group when so and so goes to the bench. Like the Warriors, for example, last year made the trade with Brooklyn that brought Dennis Schroeder
Yeah.
originally to Golden State because of that exact thing. They wanted someone who could uplift their offense when Steph Curry was not on the floor. Dennis Schroeder, though, has far more of a history and a proven ability to run an offense and distribute compared to Cam Thomas. So that's where the issue lies to me.
Absolutely, and I think that's very well said there. And as a fan, I like watching CT. You know, he's a guy you could watch, and he can hit some cool threes for you, can get you 20 a night when he's on the floor. But ultimately, he scores, but he doesn't do it at a very efficient clip. And, you know, to add in the other aspects of the game, he doesn't give you much as a facilitator. He doesn't dish the ball out. He doesn't create opportunities and elevate really the ceiling of everyone else on the floor around him. So I agree. You know, the comp that I would make is, imagine him, Jake, placed with the Nets' crosstown rival in the New York Knicks, Mike Brown, who system hinges on quick ball movement, fast pace. Like, I don't think Cam Thomas is starting with the New York Knicks. I don't think he's in their starting lineup. If
No.
he's with a head coach like Mike Brown, who kind of relies on those, like you mentioned, modern NBA offensive principles and pillars, ball movement, fast paced athleticism. That's ultimately just not the mold that Cam Thomas fits. So I agree, you know, if he were to get traded, it would be to a contending team. It would be to a team where he can be, you know, the second or third guy off the bench and play 15 to 20 minutes for you a night and give you, you know, 12 to 18 points in those minutes. Now, I want to shift our focus to this current roster and what it looks like ahead of the year. Obviously, they still hold some veteran pieces. Terrence Mann, who they acquired earlier on in this offseason. Same holds true for Haywood Highsmith, who was brought in August. Based on what you're hearing around the league, Jake, is there anything in the works for Brooklyn ahead of the season? Obviously, the Nets kicking off their 2025-2026 season just 6 days from now. Anything that can get done ahead of the season, anything that can get done ahead of roster deadline, or do you think Brooklyn's just staying pat? They're going to make their final cuts and go into the year?
Well, it's interesting because they do have to reach the salary floor.
Yeah.
And I haven't checked the numbers of late, but I still believe they're at least 15, 20 million below. So that would, in theory, mean they're going to have to add that level of salary by way of trade before the roster deadline to finalize your roster comes up on Monday night. But I haven't heard of anything, to be honest. I think right right now it's generally pretty quiet, I'd say, across the league. I'd say especially after Malcolm Brogdon's retirement,
Yeah.
that signaled that the Knicks are not going to have to trade a Pacom Dadier to keep both Brogdon and one of Landry Shamet and Garrison Matthews. The Bucks have a bit of a roster crunch. We saw them let go of Chris Livingston the other day, and that was something that a lot of people were monitoring and wondering whether or not it would be Andre Jackson who'd get let go, who would have a ton of interest around the league, really more so on two-way contract stuff if he were to ever get waived. But, you know, Livingston's the one out the door for now. Most of the buzz around the league right now has been about these rookie scale extension stuff. So you saw Keegan Murray get his 5-year 140 yesterday. We're wondering what happens now with Dyson Daniels and Shaden Sharp and whatever. I think for all those Nets trade asset guys, with Haywood Highsmith, the Terrence Manns, what have you, Haywood Highsmith still is recovering from surgery. So can't imagine we're going to see any type of trade for him until he's been out there on the floor and proven that he is the two-way player that he was when he helped Miami get deep into playoff series after playoff series as a starter down there at times too. Terrence Mann, I think also he's going to need to show continued just strong two-way. I mean, preferably with him more improvement from or more consistency from deep. I think that's kind of always been his big weakness. There hasn't been a lot of love for Terrence Mann on his current contract, though, I'll say.
Yeah.
Like, back when he was on like a 3-year, $33 million deal, something like that, I want to say, there was a lot more interest in Terrence Mann. But now that he's at 14, 15, there hasn't been as much interest in him. I mean, he was basically dumped to Brooklyn in that 3-team deal between the Nets, the Celtics, and the Hawks that brought Kristaps Porzingis to Atlanta. He was kind of like a salary dump as opposed to someone that the Celtics wanted back in return, right?
Yeah.
So I would think for all those guys, for Michael Porter Jr., I think pretty much anyone on the Nets roster who's not named like Nick Claxton. And that's not
Yeah.
to say there is a Nick Claxton trade stuff in the works, but I feel like there's really no reason for a team to go make a move on those guys right now until they have more data, more updated analysis on where those guys are currently at in their careers.
Yeah, Michael Porter Jr. there, Jake, is a very, very interesting name because the Nets struck a deal this summer with the Denver Nuggets, obviously acquiring MPJ in a first round pick in exchange for Cam Johnson, those being the three core pieces of that deal that I think was very, very polarizing around the league among the Nets fan base as well. I mean, we heard Zach Lowe pretty much outright go on his podcast and call it one of the worst trades that I think it was Bill Simmons, excuse me, actually, who went out on his podcast and said it was one of the worst trades he's seen over the past decade. And then you see some other Net fans going around and doing victory laps over the fact that they brought in Michael Porter Jr. and acquired another first round pick. He's another super intriguing guy because his cap hits over the next few years. I think it's at $40 million this year and about 38 and a half next season. If you were to make a prediction right now, is Michael Porter Jr. on this team at the end of this year? Is there any world where, I know you said there needs to be more stats, there needs to be more data for other front offices to look at, but do you think MPJ is a net come the end of the year?
I'd say probably. I'd say the one scenario that would lead to him heading out is a team like Milwaukee a year ago feeling a little bit desperate at the trade deadline and turning Chris Middleton into Kyle Kuzma. Something like that, I think, would need to happen for a team to want to pay Michael Porter Jr. that type of money that he makes and take on the off-season podcast stuff that comes with him
Yep.
and the general, he's more of a ball stopper, put it up kind of guy, just like Cam Thomas too. There's going to be, if you're a Nets fan, there's going to be a lot of possessions this season that end with a Michael Porter Jr. or a Cam Thomas jump shot.
Yeah.
That's just the reality, which might not work in Michael Porter Jr.'s favor in terms of proving his efficiency and his ability to play and play make, not just off of Nikola Jokic, right? That's also a big thing right now with Christian Brown and his conversations on his rookie scale extension with Denver. How good are these Nuggets players of the last 4 or 5 years outside of playing next to Nikola Jokic? I think that's something that is a question for everyone on that roster, and certainly for Michael Porter Jr. right now, who's never played without Nikola Jokic in the NBA. So that'll be a big piece that people really want to evaluate with him. How does he look when he's not cutting off of the potential greatest passer of all time, when he's in an offense where he is the number one option and defenses will be predicated upon stopping him? I think those are all things that teams will want to look at. But even still, just with that price point and his salary, you're going to need a team that just is desperate for scoring and really is trying to figure out a last-ditch effort to improve their team. And I feel like there's not going to be much, I don't think there's going to be a lot of inbound calls to Barclays Center, to Industry City, where the Nets practice facility is at HSS, to ask them if Michael Porter Jr. is available.
Well said. And I think when you look at a guy like MPJ, you bring up a very fair point on how he's going to look without having a player like Nikola Jokic. Also, like without playing with a point guard, in my opinion, like Jamal Murray, who I think has flown under the radar these past few years. When you talk about his success, MPJ averaged, I think, 17 and 8 it was last year on, I think, 39.2% from downtown. So gradually the efficiency is going to drop in Brooklyn, Jake, because, assume he took about 4.5 threes per game during Denver. That number is going to go up to 5 or 6. We're going to see games where he shoots 7 3-point shots. That's just what this Nets offense is going to look like. And I think Jordi Fernandez wants him here. I think he fits what Jordi looks for. He has experience playing under Jordi, and we know Jordi is a defensive-minded head coach who predicates who he plays based on their defensive ability as well. So how he fits in MPJ with this team as a whole is certainly going to be intriguing. And Jake, all these Net fans out there, they want to know about the big names. They want to know about the stars, because every time a star comes up in trade conversations, a superstar, the teams in New York are always linked to that superstar. I mean, I had to deal with Giannis conversations all off season long. Giannis isn't going anywhere for the time being. The hot name on the street is Zion Williamson. Is it the Nets? Is it any team around the league, Jake, that is going to make a move on Zion Williamson?
I think the Nets at a time saw, I mean, I know the Nets at a time saw the post Kevin Durant era bringing back Mikal Bridges and Cam Johnson. They thought Mikal was going to be this number two, this Robin type player that a Batman was going to want to come join. And eventually, I think they realized that he was not that type of player. Plus, the Knicks offer of 5 first-round picks and what have you was just so much that Brooklyn couldn't have turned that deal down.
Yep.
So that's part of why he was sent out the door. Since they made that trade, the Nets have not been under any other real directive, to my understanding, other than we're going to bottom out for the next couple of years. That's why they traded back with Houston, right? They got their own picks back
Yep.
from the Rockets in that deal with Mikal as a way to restore their draft capital from the picks they sent out the door to Houston for James Harden in the beginning of January 2021. So that was a very keen indicator right away that the Nets have been focused on being bad last year and being bad this year. After that, I'm not so certain exactly how quickly the Nets want to expedite this thing. I think a lot of it will be determined by how good these young guys are and what type of identity they can start to develop and grow with 5 first-round picks, with a bunch of young guys on the roster, like the Noah Clowneys of the world that
Yeah.
Brooklyn still is high on and what have you. So we'll see when they actually get into the fold of like trying to go big game hunting again and going after veterans again. I don't know when that is. It doesn't seem like it's this year anytime soon. I think they really, if Brooklyn, if you inject some true serum into Sean Marks or Jordy Fernandez or whoever, I think they would be really keen on saying that they would hope to get the number 1 pick and get AJ Dembonsa, right? I think that's part of, I think that's the ultimate goal there. For Zion, the Pelicans have been pretty locked in and rehabbing that relationship ever since they parted ways with David Griffin and brought Joe Dumars in. Obviously, he's in great shape right now, lost a ton of weight. I don't know how good the Pelicans are going to be in the Western Conference, where every single team outside of Utah wants to be good.
Mm-hmm.
But the Pelicans right now have shown no indication that they're trying to sell from Zion to Trey Murphy to Herb Jones. Like the Pelicans do have some type of idea that they can compete in the play-in conversation, maybe even the playoffs. That's part of why they traded a very tantalizing pick to Atlanta to get Derek Queen this year, in addition to Jeremiah Fears that they picked number 7 overall. So, yeah, I'm not expecting a Zion trade anytime soon, and I'm not expecting the Nets to really be elbowing their way in to the superstar trade conversations. But yeah, at a point in time, I think that they did think that they'd be kind of next up to bring on more stars to play with Mikal. I think they were hoping they'd be a team that Giannis would look at once upon a time, but I think that ship has sailed.
Jake, one more here for you before we let you go. Dariq
Yeah.
Whitehead, he was surprisingly waived just a few days ago, a first-round pick by Sean Marks just a couple of years ago. And I don't want to say all that surprising because they showed early on in the preseason, Jordy Fernandez in particular, that he needed to earn every single minute he got. We didn't hear much of him coming out of HSS during training camp, and now the Nets move on just 2 years later, a couple knee surgeries later, and this one annoys me a little bit as a fan because Dariq Whitehead is someone who we saw flash in some minimal NBA time last year, and I get it, there's a logjam at his position, of course, on this Brooklyn Nets roster. But when you talk about Sean Marks, if you have to pinpoint one thing that Sean Marks is good at, is he's been able to hit on a few draft picks. And this is someone he selected 2 years ago as a superstar out of Duke. And I'm sorry, I'd rather roll the dice on the upside of Dariq Whitehead than give Jalen Wilson a roster spot yet again, than roster a player like Tyrese Martin where there's no ceiling whatsoever. And I don't think he's an NBA player. So this move annoyed me as a fan. Jake, from the inside perspective, have you heard anything on what really went down? Why'd the Nets move on? Was it that the health concerns? What happened there?
I think they like Jalen Wilson a lot more than you do. That's
He led
part of
the team
it,
in
you know?
minutes last year. I mean, they love him.
I do love him, and he's, like, a high character guy, and look, this is not to say anything that Tariq Whitehead's, like, a bad dude or anything else, but the Nets are so focused right now on building a culture and an identity as much as anything else too. So I think that's part of why they like
Mhm.
Jalen Wilson so much. They wanna get back to that pre-KD, Kyrie, that Kenny Atkinson, we have a hardworking lunch pail identity. That's what Jordy's
Yep.
bringing on the sideline. That's what they're trying to identify with high character guys in the draft. And look, the reality is the league moves quick. And if you don't establish yourself as someone who's trending in a very clearly
Yeah.
positive direction, there's 5 first round picks coming in the door the year after you and or 2 years after you. And it really is unforgiving. I mean, I don't really know how strong of a draft record Sean Marks has truly had, to be honest. I mean, everyone loves Nick Claxton there, but he's never really amounted to like a clear cut top 15 center in my eyes in the league.
I think 2023 you can make the case maybe, but he fell off a cliff last year, certainly.
Yeah, he has not like consistent. He has not emerged as like a set it and forget it obvious plus
Yeah.
starter, right? I don't really think anyone he's drafted has fully emerged as that type of piece, right? Is there a guy on this roster you look at and say this team identified in the first round and that person has like been a staple of what they've done here? I mean, I don't know. I mean, there's certainly a lot of hope that these guys right now. I mean, they took a big shot on Yegor Demon, who I like, who I spent some time with at the combine, and I've interviewed him. I wrote a story on him for the Steinline, and it seemed like the Nets have liked him all along, but he was not someone most teams had going top 8.
Yeah.
So if he does not hit, that will be another moment on that draft record that will be interesting. So I'm rooting for the kid though. I'm rooting for Ben Surratt. I'm rooting for Danny Wolf. I'm rooting for all
Yeah.
these guys. I want everyone in the NBA to be successful, but it's just the reality that they haven't really had. They have not had a sterling draft record where you can just go down the list and look at Chet Holmgren and Jalen Williams and Lou Dort and what have
Yeah.
you. You know.
Jake, thank you so much for the time, my friend. Appreciate you stopping by right here on the Brooklyn Boys Show. You got any final thoughts, basketball related, non-basketball related, before we let you go right here on the program?
If you're listening, the Steinline, markstein.substack.com for your best NBA inside information for myself and the Hall of Famer Mark Stein. That's about it.
There we go. Jake, thank you so much for the time, everyone. Thank you guys for joining us right here on this Thursday evening. For Jake Fischer, I'm Connor Long saying have a great rest of your night, everyone. And as always, go Nets, baby. Peace out.